And now I would like to welcome Dr. Ashok Grover, Dr. Meenakshi Swaminathan, Dr. Santosh Unawar, and Dr. J.K. Reddy as moderator, as expert panel. And Dr. Chitra Ramamurthy and Dr. Mohan Rajan sir is here with us. I would like to request Dr. Debashish Bhattacharya sir to please be with us in this session also. It will be very kind of him. And our first speaker today in this session is Dr. Nirmal Frederick, who will be speaking on medical legal aspects for postgraduates. Dr. Nirmal, you are there?
Yes, Satyajit.
Dr. Nirmal is here.
Welcome, Nirmal.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Would like to request Dr. Nirmal to please start his presentation on medical legal aspects for
postgraduate. Am I audible? Is my slide visible? So at the outset, I would like to thank the ARC team for this wonderful opportunity. And my topic is on medical legal aspect. Right. So you all know ophthalmic practice is now hazardous and risky. Practicing defensive medicine is inevitable. And the mutual faith we have with patient is replaced with mutual suspicion. So what are the aspects of ophthalmic practice today? From doctor-centric practice, it has given way to patient-centric practice. And we have to get used to this service provider role from being a paternalistic role and guiding the patients. And it's a contractual relationship now. It's no more that guiding relationship. And the huge expectation and information overload from the media and social media and the corporatization of healthcare sidelining the role of doctors. So why we are ignorant? So most of the medical curriculum doesn't focus on medical legal aspect. Once they exposed to practice, they learn it in a hard way. And nobody wants to talk about it openly. And many of us feel it may not happen to us, and we'll deal with when it happens. So what are the challenges that are unique to our specialty? So you all know mobile ophthalmic services, cluster infection has been the mainstay of medical legal challenges in our practice, and particularly daycare surgery and the issues with reference to emergency and follow-up issues, and the various modality of payment, the paid services, free services, charity units, and now insurance, making it very difficult and challenging for the youngsters. So what it can lead to? So medical legal case can lead to loss of reputation, loss of money, loss of motivation. And for a young postgraduate who's just joining the practice, it literally spoils his mind and the career. So you have to understand this terminology called medical negligence. So you have to understand the basic issues, what is called a standard of care. If you do something which is not done by an average doctor of your qualification, experience, with the same type of infrastructure and facilities, and if the care below the standard of care falls below the standard of care, it's called as medical negligence. So this is what the code C. The code C, the standard of care with reference to what is given in the textbooks, the guidelines given by societies, the standard treatment guidelines given by the government, etc. So there are two aspects to this medical negligence. One is act of omission, and the second one is act of commission. So what are the acts of omission? Failure to perform essential tests before any surgery. For example, for cataract surgery, if you don't record the blood pressure, if you don't record the blood sugar level or the intraocular pressure, or if you don't give a proper informed counseling, if the patient has a pseudo exfoliation and you forget to tell this zonular instability and forget to maintain aseptic precautions, ask about drug sensitivity, and ruling out other pathology like chronic diabetic cystitis. So all these are acts of omission. So you should not do this. Act of commission is performing operation when it is not indicated. For example, squint surgery for a cosmetic reason in a 70-year-old man, or LASIK surgery with for -10. So these are something which are acts of commission. So what is not a medical negligence? You have to understand this. There are certain inherent risks with reference to certain procedures. For example, bleeding, wrong provisional diagnosis, and failure of treatment. For example, pressure not responding to drugs, or unexpected result like high surgically induced astigmatism. All these are not negligence, but it may go away from patient's outcome or expectation. So how to prevent these medical legal challenges in ophthalmic practice? You're learning CCC for cataract service. So you have to learn before starting your practice this CCC, consent, counseling, and communication. So communication matters in any type of practice, whether in hospital or private practice. So your communication has a huge impact. And in fact, many of the lawsuits is because of this communication problem. And importance of informed consent, this you have to understand. So any procedures carries with it certain risks, certain complication, and alternative treatment. So you have to discuss the patient, all these things with the patient and their attenders. And if possible, document all this counseling and consent procedures. And with modern day method, you can even videograph this. The second aspect is medical records. Focus on appropriate documentation. It's very important. The clinical documentation and statutory documentation are properly recorded, whatever method you follow, whether it's manual or EMR record. So these are some of the standards for clinical documentation. A huge truth is good documentation supports your defense in a court, and poor documentation helps the other side, particularly the patient's lawyer. The burden to prove negligence of a doctor is always on the patients, and doctor has to prove that he or she has followed the standard of care. So this is the important aspect of medical legal cases. So remember, we can defend endophthalmitis, DOP nucleus, ectasia, or on the table death, provided standard of care is followed. But we cannot defend wrong IOL, wrong surgery, wrong medication. So take steps to avoid these sentinel events or preventable mistake by using checklist or good documentation. And last thing is have an indemnity cover, join association, legal cells, PPLSS of IMA or AOS, and do some social activities and support your colleagues. So assess medical legal risk in your practice, identify preventable medical legal risk, develop certain strategies to minimize the risk and reduce exposure to litigation and complaints. So these are some of the overview of medical legal aspects. I would like to finish with this 9 R's. Have a good rapport. There should be a rational treatment plan to process, have a complete medical record, and don't give passing remarks on other professionals and particularly your colleagues. And thing speaks for itself. Respect the patient and the families, and results, have a good consent, don't overpromise, and risk individualized approach to each patient. To conclude, healthcare is an art as well as a science. We are good at the scientific aspect, but we need to fine tune the art component of medical practice. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nirmal. That was a wonderful presentation.
Beautiful.
Your quick comments about this, Dr. Mohan Rajan, sir?
I think nobody can be better than Nirmal on this
Absolutely.
topic. He's
Absolutely.
really a fantastic guy. But I'm just telling you, the 9 R's are very, very important. I think the most important thing is how you counsel the patient is very important. How to counsel the patient, how you talk to the patient, how you communicate with the patient, and also your records are very important. Many times we have seen, Nirmal also knows about it, that records are very, very shabby. That is the problem. So records are overwritten or it's not written properly. The sentinel events are not reported properly, and that is the reason why they are the ophthalmologist loses the case. So I think all the points have been well covered, Nirmal. That's all.
Hey,
Thank you, Dr.
Mohan, can I add something? This is Meenakshi.
Yes, Meenakshi.
Yes, ma'am, please.
Yes, sorry, I'm outside going to visit father. So if I may add, because this is a program that is targeted at the postgraduates, I wanted to add 2 things. In many of the institutions, it is the postgraduate that takes the call, especially off hours phone call is
Yes.
often handled by the postgraduates or the fellows. It is very important to document the phone conversation as well, especially in postoperative patients who call in with queries. It is very important so that the blame is not shifted and said, I called, but they told me there is no need to come.
Absolutely.
So it is very important, document phone conversation. Second is I encourage them to get into the habit of not only just signing, but writing their full name. You know how Chief used to insist, you have to write your full name,
Absolutely.
not
Yes.
just put initials, and put a seal. In a Shankar Netralaya, everybody is given a seal with their registration number when they join. So
Oh my God.
get into the habit of signing, dating it, put a seal. Then you are like the Dr. Nirmal very nicely covered. The documentation is really the key to get out of trouble.
And you know, Dr. Badrinath used to have a very funny this thing. Suddenly, before the surgery, he will go to the general ward and pull up the patient and ask the patient who is operating on you tomorrow. If they don't mention the name of Dr. Mohan or somebody, he will make sure that the case is not given to us.
My goodness.
Communicate. The patient should know who is operating. The patient, every point of time, the patient should know who is operating, what is being done to them. So that
That's our standard question during our NABH assessment, Mohan.
Yes, yes.
Very important. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. We'll move on to the next speaker, Dr. Ashok Grover, and he will be speaking on how to choose your fellowship.
May I share my screen, please? There is some sharing that has been done.
Yeah.
I think that will have to be removed. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So thank you. Wonderful to be in this lovely session meant for postgraduates, and to follow NIMLS Act is a big thing. I'll be talking about choosing the right fellowship for the postgraduates beyond post-graduation. So first question is, to fellow or not to fellow? How about being a comprehensive ophthalmologist? So you have to first decide whether you want a comprehensive ophthalmology practice or a fellow, or do a fellowship in a subspecialty. The advantage of a comprehensive ophthalmologist is the large variety of pathology that he sees, the flexibility, can practice even in a smaller city, and there may be a financial advantage. A survey of residents by American Academy showed that 2/3 residents planned on applying for a fellowship, 1/3 chose to be general ophthalmologists. And retina and cornea were the two most popular, and a good mentor was one of the most common reasons for choosing a specialty. So when you make the right choice, it depends on 3 factors: what your career goals are, some other factors that influence your decision, and what options would then you have. The career goals are often decided by your personality, your motivation level, and whether you are an achiever and go-getter or you are the santusht kind. And then, of course, what priority do you give to each of these factors? We look at these. Now, the other thing that matters is what you are eligible for, what is available, what your choice is, and what of that is feasible. Now, when you want to decide about a fellowship, you're going to choose a specialty, and then you're going to choose an institution which you want to go to. So in choosing your specialty, again, your objectives need to be known. Your interest in a particular subspecialty needs to be worked out. You also need to think of what the demand will be for the specialty, particularly in the kind of context that you want to work, and what is the financial potential that this particular specialty will have. So you have to define your objective. You want to do your own practice or work in a teaching institution or in a multi-specialty private institution, what kind of aptitude you have, and what kind of strengths and weaknesses you have. You also need to look at what kind of interest you have, which specialty you have interest in, type of patients you enjoy dealing with, technical procedures you enjoy doing most. Your exposure to the specialty in your residency often determines that. And if you have a mentor or idol in a specialty, that works as an incentive or a disincentive. So let's again look at some of these factors. Define for yourself. Are you skilled at surgery? Do you get tense when you get a nucleus drop to the extent of getting a sleepless night? Do you worry about evidence-based practice and choose an eminence-based practice? And are you fascinated by research or evidence-based medicine? You also need to look at the demand for the subspecialty. You need to look at the changing patterns. This is in relation to UK. We don't have Indian data. You can see that the general ophthalmology trend is increasing in UK, while there is a reduction in the demand for plastics and VR surgery as compared to the previous decade. You also need to look at the financial potential of your specialty. High volume cataract, LASIK were the highest earners, vitreoretina next, and pediatric ophthalmology, glaucoma, cornea, neuro-ophthalmology in that order. So look at the pros and cons of each specialty. Vitreoretina will be required in every institution, financially very good, but less dramatic clinical results. Cornea, combining medicine and surgery, immediate results, but you can work for institution or for your own practice. Oculoplastics, large variety, large number of pathologies, working with other specialties. And if you look at aesthetics, possibly a great financial future too. Pediatric ophthalmology, you'll probably need to work in an institution and you should love the specialty. Glaucoma, you need to be more of a physician than surgeon and prefer to work in an institution. Neuro-ophthalmology, you prefer institutional practice and want to give more time for academics, teaching and research, and finance is not your priority. Uvea ocular trauma, not so much available as of now, and comprehensive ophthalmology. If you've had a weak residency training, you have had deficiencies, then you possibly need to do comprehensive ophthalmology first, and if you want to work in a smaller town. And then look for your institution. Look at the faculty, the infrastructure, the academic program, the kind of hands-on experience it gives you, and what other peers have had as an exposure in that institution. So final advice, during residency days, enter residency with an open mind, spend ample time in exploring those specialties, try and develop a career focus during residency and look at the uniqueness of these. And when finishing residency, list out your short-term, intermediate and long-term goals, list out your priorities. Discuss with trusted mentors and peers, and spend some time as an observer with a mentor in a specialty. But above all, use common sense. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ashok Grover, sir. Dr. Debashish Bhattacharya, sir, you're there? Dr. Debashish Bhattacharya. Meenakshi, ma'am.
Yes, again, lovely talk. And say hi to Pooja before I forget.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, and lovely talk, Ashok, as always. And I just wanted to very quickly add, over the years, over the last 15, 20 years, that's one of the most biggest decisions for postgraduates as they are finishing is to whether to do fellowship or not do fellowship. If yes, which one? And where is a very big question for them. I just wanted to, since again, this is targeted to the postgraduates, I wanted to just suggest that number one, by about the third year, you have some idea what you definitely have an idea what you don't like. And you have an idea about 2 or 3 things of what you may like. Yes. And then you can start, now there is a plethora of webinars. There's a plethora of content online that you can participate, start exploring and see if this is something that excites you as a postgraduate. The second thing I would say, once the pandemic is, in control and the observerships are allowed again, if there is a gap between your postgraduate completion and fellowship starting, request observerships. Most people are willing to allow you to come. Many are even willing to allow you into their theater. So for instance, if you've had very little oculoplasty exposure during your PG, which is not unusual, sometimes in some of the national board hospitals and even our medical colleges, you may not have seen the whole gamut of whole variety of cases. So in such cases, you ask for a week's observership, go hang out in the OPD, go into the OT, see what's going on for yourself. Sometimes that is extremely helpful to decide whether this is your thing.
Went offline.
Yeah, got disconnected.
Yeah.
Agree wholeheartedly.
Thank you, Dr. Ashok Grover, sir.
Yes.
We'll move on to the next presentation by Dr. Mohan Rajan, sir, who will be speaking on how and where to get FACO and SICS training. This is such an important topic for the postgraduates, and we'd like to welcome Dr. Mohan Rajan to speak on this, sir.
You able to see my screen, Satyajit?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you, Satyajit and Chitra and the ARC for the wonderful opportunity. I'm going to talk to you in the next 6 minutes about beyond post-graduation, how and where to get the FACO SICS training. Okay, Dr. Gaurav was very nicely mentioning about, because everybody wants to do some fellowship, cornea, glaucoma, surgical retina, medical retina, uvea, oculoplasty, whatever you want to do. But to add on to this, always have a FACO SICS training with you, because you can add one more specialty to whatever you are doing. Suppose you do a cornea fellowship, you can add cataract to that. You can do if you do a glaucoma fellowship, you can have cataract to that as well. So FACO's SICS training, why it is necessary? Because we have found out that an astounding 1/3 of the PGs passing out of various institutes in India have done less than 50 cases of SICS FACO in their entire 3 years. This is really alarming. This is, I'm talking about in pre-COVID era. But post-COVID, it's going to be even worse than this, because they have not had cases for almost 1.5 years or 2 years now. And this is a perfect planning is very, very essential. A student definitely decides during his pre-final year how to go about post-graduation and part to his career. When it comes to cataract, the main breadwinner, his planning should be perfect. Now, certificate courses are available, any use? Yes. Fellowship courses are available, short-term, long-term. For example, the short-term 3 months course, Ratan Tata Fellowship, which is Shankar Netralia, residency come fellowship. Then every single ophthalmologist has to get himself trained in cataract surgery. Learning SICS, very essential. Learning FACO is also very, very essential. Where to go? There are a lot of places where to go. Types of training, whether community ophthalmology wing is there. If so, what is the capacity load? Is there a sufficient trainers there? Background of the training institution. The track record of the training institution is very important. When we started the FACO way back in 93, 94, at that time, we didn't have any FACO training institutes, and we used to see the video cassettes, and probably I went abroad to UK for 1 or 2 months and learned FACO. But now we have dime a dozen. Every major city, smaller city as well, has got lovely institutes. And to name a few of the institutes, you can just say that many institutes across the length and breadth of the country. Choose an institute which is near your place of practice. For example, you don't have to come all the way from Delhi to Chennai. You just have to go from Delhi to some other place in Delhi itself. There are many centers there. So all the way from Guwahati, you don't have to come to Chennai. You go to a place in like Disha Hospital in Calcutta, where you can see we can do a lot of FACOs and SICs as well. Duration of training is very, very important. Minimum 3 months. Number of surgeries, minimum 80 to 100 cases for you to become a little more confident. More the merrier. So some institutes like Eli Prasad, you can do about 500, 600, 700 cases, and you can become very, very confident. Selecting an institution with community wing is wise, sufficient case load, no need to wait for cases. Even during the festivals, holidays, training continues without any problem. 3 T's are very important. Just like the 3 C's of Nirmal Frederick: train, trainer, training. If you have the 3 T's right, then you have probably boarded the right train to travel across the entire FACO SICS spectrum. So familiarity with the instruments like the FACO missions, cataract training, what a trainee is looking for to acquire the skills in doing an SICS FACO independently, end of the course, tips on how to handle some complex situation, like a small pupil or a Rexistat or a PCR, a mentor who can guide them and help them in the journey, combination of theory class and hands-on experience, accommodation, course fees, number of cases, a person who understands he or she to get trained and willing to do that irrespective of the age, to train them in a stepwise approach is very, very important. To listen and stop, when to avoid or any complication. Tamil Arasi was mentioning that also, to treat the patient with the compassion, to be a part of the team and seeing the pre-ops and post-ops as well. So you need to become a part of the team for you to become a better trainee as well. Some centers have the side scope. Side scope is very, very necessary. Nowadays, we have a 3D system, which is even made by Appasamy. We have the 3D system. Some hospitals have. We have the Ingenuity. We have the and other things we can do. So the 3D system actually aids them in training. I'll take another 30 seconds. They'll get a certificate after completion. And these are the theory and lecture classes, wet lab, training simulators. We saw it, watch videos, practice on animal eyes. Help Me See is something which has been talked about by Bhaskar Srinivasan. Proper surgeon preparation, good ECG surgeon, familiarity with the microscope, proper surgeon preparation, again, understand the lens anatomy, familiarity with the instruments, again, going for this thing and complications, a win-win situation. The training benefit with the training program to start their surgical journey. The hospital becomes a state-of-art training center. Good to collaborate with the national and international training and hospital for future endeavors. A beautiful teacher, student, colleague relationship is very good. You have to become mentally tough. Do not become euphoric by success or depressed by failures during this training program. You need to have that self-confidence and the self-belief that you'll become better and better. Thank you very much again, the ARC for this wonderful opportunity.
Thank you so much, sir. That was such a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Very nice. Dr. Ashok Grover, sir, a quick comment from you, sir. Sir, you are muted, sir.
Grover is there.
Yeah, I think Rajan was very, very right. You know, you don't have to go to a remote area. You know, cataract surgery is available everywhere.
Everywhere.
But you have to choose the mentor right, and you have to choose the teacher right. I think that is very important. That explains why my children chose Mohan Rajan. to go and, you know, that there is a lot of difference in how a person teaches and how keen he is on teaching. So you have to choose the right mentor, you have to choose the right institution, and you have to get the right volume of work, just as he explained. And there should be a structured kind of program to give you the right direction in approaching your surgery. That is very important.
Thank you so much, sir. Meenakshi, ma'am.
I wanted to say, Satyajit, you came to SN for the SRTF. So
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
So yes, and you know very well firsthand that it's a very structured, gradually increasing program.
Yes,
And I
ma'am.
wanted to, that's why I want to tell the postgraduates, when you start out in post-graduation, when you go for short-term, long-term, everybody is asking, what is the numbers? What numbers will I do? Numbers are important, but they are relative. What is important is that you are trained in a stepwise fashion. You, like Dr. Mohan Rajan said, you go from wet lab to perhaps virtual reality, like Help Me See. And then you are stepwise going into SICS. Even people who are trained in other institutes, it does not hurt to come back and revise and get some little nuances into your surgical technique. So I think it's, I want to take, before I forget, I want to thank Chitra and Mohan and all of you for including me in this panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you, Dr. Mohan Rajan, sir, for your
One thing I
presentation.
just want to add is the trainer-trainee is a two-way traffic. Okay, it has to be a two-way. It has to give and take on both sides. Then only it will be successful, both
Yes,
for the
sir.
trainer as well as for the trainee. We have
Yes,
found out that we have trained more than 600 people from across the world, and almost 85 to 90% of them are still performing phacos, practicing phacoemulsifications. We do only phacoemulsification training. Of course, the SICS is done for the postgraduates.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. Do we have Dr. Santosh Honawar here?
He must
No,
be
sir.
in-
No, sir.
And if we don't have Dr. Santosh Honawar, we can go back to Dr. Vinita Gupta for our presentation. Dr. Vinita Gupta, are you ready with your presentation?
Off microphone. On.
Yes, perfect.
So, as already been discussed by all the speakers earlier, that obviously using how to know and how to use an operating microscope is the basics which a person who's joining as a postgraduate trainee in ophthalmology has to know. Since it is the most important surgical instrument in the era of ophthalmic surgeries, most of the ophthalmic surgeries we are using a microscope. It provides us not only with a magnified view and illuminated high quality image of the miniature structures of our eye, but also it has an additional benefit of giving us a high quality of stereopsis, which is actually required for all our surgical procedures. So understanding settings of your microscope is therefore the most important fundamental step of an ophthalmic surgery. What are the prerequisites for an ideal microscope? Ideally, it should have a good stereoscopic visualization. The illuminating system should be such that it should evenly illuminate the entire surgical field. There should be a long working distance so that your instruments do not touch any part of the microscope and become unsterile. This microscope itself should be very stable, and it should have the possibility to adapt to a wide range of procedures, whether it is an inter-segment surgery, whether it is a posterior segment surgery, because we need to have different depths of focus for all these. Why is PG training initially necessary for this? As I already discussed, because obviously we cannot do most of the surgeries of ophthalmic surgeries without the microscope. And as an undergraduate, we are not given any training in the use of operating microscope, no experience in doing a microsurgery as well during the undergraduate period. The disadvantage of an operating microscope nowadays, unless until you have a high-end microscope which has a projector system to it, a camera attached to it, and we are projecting it onto a screen, then it's different. But otherwise, there's only one assistant who's able to observe the surgery with the main surgeon. And even if it is, unless we do use a 3D system, even if you're projecting on the screen, it will be a 2D visualization, unless you have a high-end Ingenuity system or other systems with APA available for 3D visualization. Then again, we do not have, as a PG, when we're joining as a PG, we do not have any hand-eye-foot coordination concept. Maybe lot of people may not be even having the biodexterity which is required for ophthalmic surgeries. And also the binocular and depth perception analysis, which is to be done in coordination with your own optical system, and the optical system of the operating microscope is also not there. You've not been trained for that. So how does training help? It helps in visualization. Obviously, you're able to see better ocular structures, better image resolution, a wider field, illumination is under your control, and depth perception. Physically also, you tend to learn how to keep your posture without causing unnecessary ergonomic strains on your posture. Correction, also you learn to adapt to eye strain, headache, diplopia, all those things once you're being trained for microscope use in the wet labs or the dry labs or the simulated labs. And how does it further help is basically, obviously, as I already told, you will be able to understand a postgraduate training will be able to understand what the various parts of microscope will help in learning his coordination for all this hand, foot, and eye coordination. It helps the postgraduate also to adapt to an OT environment and the microsurgery in a wet lab scenario. So he is able to gain a comfortable learning experience in that scenario and is able to develop his skills before he actually moves on to the actual cases in the operating room. So this gives him a sort of vibes of his fear of doing the actual surgery. Obviously, the principle of an operating microscope is based on any optics. There's all optic-based principles, and there are various terms which we use in these optics. I'll go about these terms as we discuss the various parts of the microscopes. The basic thing which you have to remember is obviously the purpose of a good ophthalmic microscope is that it should have smooth magnification without any change in the working distance. And for this smooth transit of magnification, either we can have a knob which can give us a stepwise magnification, or we can have a zoom system which has a foot pedal control. And the purpose is that without the change in the eye object distance, they're able to achieve a good image size on the retina for whatever surgery which we are doing. So these are basically the main parts, the optic cards, the binocular tubes, the beam splitter, the magnification changer, the objective lens, and finally the surgical field. I'll be talking about these in details. Maybe the apochromatic optic concept. Apochromatic optic concept, I'll skip this, but the parts on operating microscope are basically three: optical system, illumination system, the stand, and the suspension arm. So the optical system is basically consists of a binocular head, a magnification changer, and an objective lens. So this is basically the main surgeon's position, and this is the assistant eyepieces. These are, I can just skip these slides because we were explaining these things in details. We can just go. So what is the next thing, which is a magnification changer, which I've already talked about, which can be in the form of a knob or could be foot controlled with a foot paddle. The working distance concept is that basically it is a distance between the objective lens to the point of focus at which we are working. And this is fixed depending on the type of surgery which we have taken. And the next concept, which is very important for the postgraduates to know, is the path focality concept, which means it is that state of configuration which we're able to enable magnification changes without causing change in the point of focus. So there's a video on that, probably short of time, I will not run this video, but there's a path focality basically means that even at the first we bring the microscope to the highest magnification, we set it there and bring the objects in focus, then we go to the minimum magnification and then again bring the object into focus. And at this, once this has been done, after that, we will not be able to, even while changing the magnification at any point of time during the surgery, will not be requiring to change the gross focus. All the settings would be done by our fine focus on the foot pedal control. So depth of field and depth of focus, these are basically reversely related to the magnification. So higher the magnification, shallow will be the depth of field or the depth of focus which we get. And similar is the resolution is directly related. So resolution will be the same as will be better if you have a higher magnification, but the depth of focus and depth of field will go.
Ma'am, can you conclude, please?
Yeah. So just one important thing which I would like to tell you about the illumination system, we use coaxial method of illumination. The purpose of coaxial illumination is that the light follows back the same path as the images, and this helps us in avoiding shadowing. And this is an important concept which is used in ophthalmic operating microscopes. So this is a diagram which is just showing how it works. And in this stand and suspension arm, basically to give stability to the microscope, and the foot pedal settings, basically which have a joystick, which helps in moving in a horizontal plane. We can make fine movements. Then the footrest, which is there, and this is all programmable. So we can have the upper rocker switch, which could be for the focus in and out, and the lower rocker switch will be the zoom in and out, or we can have interchangeable settings depending on the surgeon's convenience. But it is important that as initially the person has to understand that he should initially, when he's starting with the surgery, he should be able to understand where to turn on the microscope. He should be able to manually bring the microscope onto the area of focus, and then determine which side he has to sit on, with the temporal approach or superior approach, depending on the type of surgery which you are doing. And initially, in the beginning of the surgery, you have to first of all center your X5 button, that is the zoom, that is your joystick, with the control which is there on the microscope, not through the foot pedal, because the foot pedal is for fine focus, fine changes. And similarly, focus it, as I told you, by the part focality concept in the beginning itself. So that whatever focus later on, you do not need to touch your microscope body. It is all by foot pedal controls. Check your interpupillary distance and zero the objective so that you're not either over accommodating, or also dial in your refractive errors in the eyepieces lenses where there is a dialing for your own refractive errors. And so this will allow you to have the maximum exertion of these functions during the case. So this is in the end, after this training, should be able to say that I know my microscope. So all these things are important for a postgraduate to start any ophthalmic surgery.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. We have had a long day now. Everybody is now pretty tired. We are very, very grateful to senior members like Dr. Ashok Grover sir, Dr. Mohan Rajan sir, Dr. Meenakshi ma'am. We are very, very grateful for your time, for your contribution, for your guidance. Dr. Nirmal Frederick is there. Thank you so much, sir, for being with us all through. Padam, a big thanks and salute to you for being whole day alert. And because of you, we are finishing on time. That you have done a great job today. You must go and relax now. I'll put in a big word of praise for you at AIUS. And
so it was also your support. You were also with me for the whole day.
Max off. Very, very well organized. Satyajit.
Thank you so much.
All thanks to Chitra ma'am.
Very well done, ARC, and very well done, Satyajit. Very well done, Chitra.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much to everybody. Thanks so much to all the speakers. Thank you, everybody, and goodbye, and thank you very much.
Good night.